Welcome to this week's episode of Under the Radar, a show where I laser focus on subjects that aren't getting the attention they deserve in the mainstream media because of Donald's, quite frankly, impressive ability to keep us in chaos, to distract us, and to fail. There's been a lot of talk this week about this country's fall into authoritarianism. Free speech is being attacked, and political retribution is at an all time high. All of this, of course, is coming from the right, specifically from the Trump regime. But one way that Donald is sneaking his autocratic ways into our daily lives may not be as obvious to us because it doesn't involve the suspension of a very famous person's talk show. This is happening in our schools and it's targeting our children. In the middle of all of this week's chaos, Secretary of Education Linda McMahon announced on Wednesday the launch of a civics education coalition. This includes the Education Department and more than 40 partner groups, all of them on the right, all of them closely aligned with so called MAGA values. That's right. Our children's civics classes, long considered a neutral space in which children were taught about their government and about how to engage in citizens, will now be indoctrinated into the divisive MAGA lies that are being pushed by the Trump regime. Donald has long signaled his plan to come after the core of teaching our children how to be informed, responsible citizens. Back in 2022, he said, quote, they call it civics education, which is nothing more than a fake name for radical left indoctrination, unquote. Really? Really? So the word civics has no meaning anymore, apparently. Is it indoctrination when your kids learn how the government works? Or is what Donald really saying here that teaching children about our system of government and how to engage with it responsibly makes it harder for the Trump regime to execute an authoritarian takeover? I mean, I think it's true that Republicans understand that an educated electorate is their worst enemy. The Civics Initiative, if you want to call it that, is being led by the America First Policy Institute, which sounds terrifying. This is a MAGA aligned think tank that has been responsible for staffing Donald's second administration. In 2022, the group presented a piece of model legislation for a quote unquote Civics Course Act to be introduced in states friendly to their ideas, which is to say, red states. It included requirements for students to spend time studying the nation's founding documents and figures while banning the teaching of the quote, defamatory history of America's founding, unquote. In other words, they objected to the teaching of any topics that suggest slavery or inequality were in any way inherent to this nation's institutions. In other words, they want to whitewash history so that white people can continue getting away with what they've been getting away with since this nation's founding and well before it. It also banned teaching the concepts of systemic racism, gender fluidity, and prohibits teachers from offering course credit for engaging with, quote, social or public policy advocacy, unquote. Oh, the horrors. How could we possibly reward our children for wanting to be helpful to their fellow citizens? Instead, Republicans want our children to be easily impressionable, therefore more easily indoctrinated into their way of thinking. Donald is also doing everything his base demands of him, which is to say, the white fundamentalist Christian part of his base, to bring religion back into our public schools. He has pledged to restore mandatory prayer in these spaces that should reject it entirely, attempting to reverse decades of separating the church from our educational institutions. Remember that quaint thing called separation between church and state? While Donald tries to spin all of this as a return of morality to schools, a topic about which he knows exactly nothing, what really is going on here is that this is just another way to exert power over our children and their families. There are countless examples of moral crusades during American history that have led to division and destruction of our communities, from prohibition to the war on drugs. John McGleon, an opinion contributor for The Hill, says, quote, each of these began with promises of protection, protection from alcohol, from terror, from poverty, from drugs, from communism. each ended by entrenching the power of the state and narrowing the space for freedom, unquote. That is exactly what this is about here. It is not protecting our children. It's about keeping them ignorant and vulnerable. This is not about American values or morality, God knows. This is about making sure that it is easier for Donald and his corrupt fascist party to take over what is left of our struggling democracy. But before we go on, we dive into the stories of Barry Trump media that stay hidden by the Trump regime. So please like and share this video. And if you believe in our mission, please subscribe to our channel. Those schools that won't subscribe to Donald's ideology, so called, he doesn't have one, but you know what I'm saying, are being punished in significant ways. Many blue states and cities are fighting back against Donald's absurd education policies and attempts at indoctrination, but he has sent schools across the country a chilling message: bow down or lose funding. The Education Department's acting assistant secretary for civil rights, Craig Traynor, warned 3 cities this week that they're about to be cut off. New York City Public Schools chairperson Gregory Faulkner, Chicago Board of Education President Sean Hardin, and Fairfax County Public Schools Superintendent Michelle Reed on Tuesday got word that the department is prepared to withhold more than $67 million in federal funding. These funds will be withheld from magnet schools over potential civil rights violations if their districts don't come into compliance with federal law by Friday. Traynor wrote a letter to school officials in which he said the Education Department's Office for Civil Rights is, quote, deeply concerned about New York City Department of Education's guidelines to support transgender and gender expansive students, the text of which authorizes discrimination on the basis of sex in violation of Title IX, unquote. Schools across the country are hearing this message: follow the propaganda or lose your funding. In other words, let us indoctrinate your students in a way that is harmful to them, or you will not have money to do things that your students need. I don't know, things like school lunches, perhaps, or sex education, things like that. Luckily, some schools are already fighting back with legal action. Here's ABC 10 with more on how California universities are fighting these directives.
UC unions plan to sue the Trump administration over withheld funding. It all comes as the government has fined UCLA about $1.2 billion to settle alleged civil rights violations. The UC Office of the President said that while they are focused on UCLA primarily, they are monitoring withheld funding at other campuses also. More than $17 billion in federal funding currently supports Medicare and Medicaid funding, research and program support, and student financial aid. In a letter from the UC president, he said, quote, this represents one of the gravest threats to the University of California in our 157-year history. Losses of significant research and other federal funding would devastate UC and inflict real long-term harm on our students, our faculty and staff, our patients, and all Californians. The letter also details existing impacts, including layoffs because of cuts in federal research funding.
Yeah, who cares? Nobody cares about harming our students in the Trump regime. Donald just wants the power. So he's giving our schools 2 choices: indoctrinate your students with right-wing propaganda or suffer from lack of funding, have your funding pulled. But there's a third choice. This is what we could do instead: fight, fight, fight. See what I did there? Please take a second and like and share this video. It'd be awesome if you could subscribe to the channel. If you're listening to us in podcast form, please follow us and give the show a 5-star rating, because it really does help other people find our content. Thanks.